Well, since going on sale in 2013, the series The School for Good and Evil has sold more than 500,000 copies in 22 countries. A new novel is out, The Last Ever After. New York Times bestseller Soman Chainani joins us today to talk about this epic conclusion to the series. Good morning, Soman. How are you?
Good. Thanks so much for having me.
And I've got the book right here. I understand it's a good one. How does The School for Good and Evil turn all these preconceived notions of fairy tales on their heads?
I mean, I think I grew up watching so many Disney movies. You know, that was sort of exclusively what we had in our house. We didn't have cable, internet, video games. And so, you know, growing up and watching those stories over and over again, they sort of plant in your subconscious. And I think, you know, you'd be surprised at how much society in general sort of affected by those movies, you know? And so I wanted to go in and look at fairy tales the way they used to be before Disney got a hold of them, and write a series that was more in that vein, that was more like a survival guide to life for kids, you know, that had equal amounts of romance and horror and comedy and all those things. So it's this question of what is a real happy ending? Like, is it, you know, rather than just finding a prince or true love, what is a real happy ending for a teenager?
Well, and I know each novel has had a theme. What inspired The Last Ever After?
So the first book looks at good versus evil and sort of the stereotypes we attach with those things. So like, instead of the blonde princess being the hero of the story, she turns out to be so kind of the worst villain ever. You know, the second book looks at boys versus girls and this idea of how we stereotype genders in fairy tales and breaking those apart. So by the end of the second book, you have boys turning into girls, girls turning into boys, and all sorts of, you know, insane things happening. And then the third one, The Last Ever After, looks at old versus young and sort of all the tags that we put on the old and the young and sort of messing with those.
Yeah, who gets to decide their fate? To be trained as fairy tale heroes or as villains?
And so I think that's the question in the book is, who's ultimately in charge of this? Is it the pen that's writing the story? Because there's this, you know, enchanted pen that writes the fairy tales. Is that dictating people's fates? Or is it the characters themselves? And it sort of speaks to this larger question of, you know, who's in charge of our own stories in our own lives? Is it us that's making decisions, or are we ultimately controlled by something bigger than ourselves? So, you know, these are all questions I'm interested in exploring as we go along.
Yeah, and then diving into the novel brings up questions about the author. You graduated with honors from Harvard and penned, I guess, this interesting thesis. What was it?
It was on, you know, looking at wicked women in fairy tales and trying to understand why we create such differences between the princess and the witch when they're actually the same character. You know, if you look at a princess and a witch in depth, you realize that they're so similar. And so that's sort of what I was after. You know, in their quest for identity, the fact that they're not happy, you know, that they're looking for something outside themselves, like all these things, they're quite, you know, the same person in the end.
Yeah, from what I understand, you're also an acclaimed screenwriter, a film director. Any plans to produce The School for Good and Evil?
So Universal bought the rights. They are in the process of making the movie now. It'll come out Christmas 2017. It starts shooting in London pretty soon, and I wrote the screenplay for it. So, you know, I sort of got to come back to what I was trained for at the beginning, which was writing movies. So it's been quite kind of an amazing process going from movies to books and back to movies.
Right. The School for Good and Evil, The Last Ever After, is available now where books are sold. Thanks, Soman, and good luck with the latest one.
Thanks so much for having me.
You betcha. Mary, over to you.